Swedish Embassy in the Netherlands is honored to present A Gender Equal World by Anette Brolenius. Welcome, Anette.
Thank you.
You have portrayed human rights defenders all over the world, women and men. Why?
Well, the project started by me meeting Dennis Mukwege, the gynecologist and surgeon who repairs raped women and children in eastern Congo. I spent some time in his hospital. I met many of his patients, women and children even as young as 3 years old that had been subject to gross sexual violence. You cannot imagine, it's heartbreaking. I saw medical staff in tears. And even worse, many of these, in addition to the trauma of the violence committed against them, many of them were also shunned. They weren't welcome back in their families. I met 13-year-olds that had nowhere to go after this. So what I asked myself was then, so who do they have? If they can't go to the police for fear of reprisals, or because perhaps the police is part of the problem, they don't have the health, the strength, the resources, the knowledge to claim their rights, to seek justice. If your own community fails you, who do you have? The answer I found there was the human rights defenders. They are often really the last recourse for victims of human rights abuse. So as I didn't want to focus only on the victims, but more also on the change agents, I set out to meet and to portray the human rights defenders in eastern Congo. And many of them are threatened both there and around the world. They are subject to intimidation, threats, arbitrary arrests, or even worse, some have paid the ultimate price for their commitment to human rights. I found the most amazing, brave, committed persons you can imagine. So since then, I've dedicated the last 5 to 6 years on meeting and portraying human rights activists. Well, the project started by me meeting Dennis Mukwege, the gynecologist and surgeon in eastern Congo who repairs raped women and girls, victims sometimes as young as 3 years old. I saw medical staff in tears, and even worse, in addition to the trauma of the violence committed against them, many of these survivors were also shunned. They weren't welcome back to their communities. I met 13-year-olds with nowhere to go. So what I asked myself was, who do you have then? If your own community completely fails you, you can't go to the police for fear of reprisals, or perhaps because the police is part of the problem. So the project started with me meeting Dennis Mukwege, the gynecologist and surgeon in eastern Congo who repairs raped women and children. I met victims as young as 3 years old. Unspeakable, gross sexual violence. I saw medical staff in tears. And even worse, many of these survivors were then shunned. They weren't welcome back to their communities. I met 13-year-olds with no place to go. So I asked myself, who is there for them then? If you can't go to the police for fear of reprisals, perhaps the police is part of the problem in some areas. You're too sick, you're not strong enough, you don't have the resources or knowledge to seek justice, to claim your rights, to report these crimes. Who do you have? Who's going to be your voice if your own voice is broken? And the answer I found to this was human rights defenders. They're often the last recourse for victims of human rights abuse. So I decided to go out and find and portray human rights activists, first in Congo. I met the most amazing, committed, dedicated individuals who went out of their way to support victims and to seek justice for them. So after having spent time there, met all these activists in Congo, I returned home, and I have, during the last 5 to 6 years, portrayed activists from all over the world. Well, the project started by me meeting Dennis Mukwege, the gynecologist and surgeon who repairs raped women and children in eastern Congo. I spent a couple of weeks in his hospital. I met many of his patients, some of the survivors of gross sexual violence as young as 3 years old. I saw medical staff in tears. To make matters worse, many of these survivors of violence were then shunned. They weren't welcome back in the communities. So what I asked myself then was, so who do you have? If your community fails you completely, if you're too afraid to go to the police for fear of reprisals, you're too weak, vulnerable, perhaps lacking knowledge or strength to report the crime, to seek help, to seek justice, who's going to be there for you? Who's going to be your voice if your own voice is weak and broken? And the answer I found to that was human rights defenders. They are often the last recourse for survivors of human rights abuses. So what I did, I set out to find human rights activists in eastern Congo. I wanted to move my focus from the survivors of violence to the change agents, those working to end the violence. And many of those are subject to threats as well. Human rights activists, not only there but around the world, are subject to threats, violence, arbitrary arrests, even worse. Some have paid the ultimate price for their commitment. So after having done that in Congo, I came back home, and I have spent the last 5 to 6 years portraying human rights activists from all over the world, from every single continent.
And what we are seeing here is a small collection of these fantastic portraits. What did you learn in the process?
Well, one thing I learned was, and what impressed me, was the impact that one single committed individual can have on the lives of others. I also learned that we can't take these rights for granted. Because in our countries, I think we do. We enjoy rights which others have fought for us. Well, one thing I learned was the impact that one single committed individual can have on the lives of others. I also learned that we can't take our rights for granted, and I think we do, many of us. In many other places, people are fighting for their lives, protecting, defending, and promoting human rights. They put themselves in danger. You have human rights defenders being subject to violence, threats, arbitrary arrests. Some even pay the ultimate price for their commitment. One of the important things I learned, I think, is that we shouldn't take our rights for granted. And I think we do. In many parts of the world, people are fighting for their lives, defending basic human rights. You have human rights activists being subject to threats, harassment, intimidation, arbitrary arrests, even paying with their lives, defending, promoting, protecting human rights. So we can't take them for granted. Another thing I learned is the impact that one single individual can have on the lives of others. Well, one important thing I learned, and which I think all of us should take to heart, is the power one single individual can have on the lives of others. I also learned that we shouldn't take our rights for granted, and I think many of us here do. They can easily be suppressed or removed, that we need to continue fight for these rights and protect these rights. One important thing I learned, and which I think all of us should take to heart, is the influence one single committed individual can have on the lives of others. Another thing I learned is that we shouldn't take our rights for granted. They can easily be suppressed or even removed. I've also learned that we should not take our rights for granted, that they can easily be suppressed or removed, and that we need to stay engaged. And that is in all societies, also those societies which we don't necessarily associate with human rights abuses. I portrayed people from all continents of this world for this series.
And how did it affect you, portraying all these, portraying and listening to these stories?
Well, for one thing, it makes you angry and frustrated. That violence, like the violence we see in DRC, in Congo, for example, that it continues year after year. Another thing is that listening to these stories makes me humble as well. It makes me appreciate what I have, what we've achieved in our countries. Well, of course, it makes you angry and frustrated to hear that this violence, for example, in DRC, can simply continue for decades on end. Listening to these stories also made me humble, in a way, appreciating what I have and what we have created in our societies. I think perhaps we complain too much here. We're doing pretty well. Of course, listening to these stories affected me. First of all, it made me angry and frustrated. Hearing the violence continuing in places like DRC for years on end. It needs to stop. It also made me humble, in a way, appreciating what I have and what we've created in our own societies.
And why do you think it's important to give these forefighters a podium?
Well, I think it's important that we discuss democracy and human rights. I think by doing that, we put a finger on the pulse. We mustn't put ourselves in a situation where we or our governments can say, oh, we didn't know. We need to keep talking about this. We need to talk about democracy and human rights at home, at schools, at policy and legislative level, internationally and nationally.
In your opinion, what's the relationship between gender or equal rights and human rights?
I don't think you can separate the two. Women's rights, gender-related rights are human rights. It's not either or.
It's both, they go together.
Yeah, they go together.
In your opinion, what is the relationship between gender equality and human rights? Gender equality rights and human rights?
I don't think you can separate the two. I think women's rights, gender-related rights are human rights. It's not either or, it's both. I don't think you can separate the two. Women's rights, gender-related rights are human rights. Miriam Yalabi, a Syrian activist I portrayed, she put it very well. She said, the representation of women is a human right. Now, she was talking about representation of women at the peace negotiating tables, but that, of course, goes to any other area as well.
And even in countries where democracy is taken for granted, we see threats to democracy, like less interest in politics, authoritarian governments rising, a certain fatigue of hearing about equal rights and gender. In what way can your exposition change this? Fatigue
is always a danger. Our attention span is short and we very quickly move it to problems and issues closer to home. I think it would be a bit presumptuous of me to think that my exhibition is going to change that. What I'm hoping is that the individuals I portrayed and their stories can inspire you and others to think about what you can do. even if it's only at a personal level, even if it's only about helping one other person. Perhaps you could choose to support one of those are portrayed or the organizations they work for so that they can continue be the change agents we need them to be. Fatigue is always a danger. Our attention span is generally quite short. We quickly move to problems and issues closer to home. It would be a bit presumptuous of me to think that my exhibition is going to change that. But I'm hoping that it will be an inspiration to people. I'm hoping that people will perhaps think a bit about what they can do. It could be at a very personal level, what you as one individual can do to help another. And that you would take inspirations from the stories of those are portrayed. Or perhaps that you choose to support one of those are portrayed for the series or his or her organization so that they can continue be the change agents they need to be in their countries.
How do you think the corona crisis has impacted life for these human rights defenders?
I can't speak for individual human rights defenders, but I can see problems arising for them. Of course, many of them are threatened, and they could be easier targets in isolation, for one thing. I think it's more difficult for them to get media attention or to bring attention to human rights under these circumstances. I think it could affect them in many different ways. Many of these activists are threatened. I think they could be easier targets in isolation. It's more difficult for them to do their work, of course, during lockdown. Well, first of all, I fear there's an effect on human rights in general, but also the work of human rights defenders. In terms of rights, of course, you have the right to health. There is a fear of an increase in domestic violence, where in particular women are more exposed. I can't speak for individual human rights defenders, but I think that those in danger are even more vulnerable now. They could, of course, be easier targets in isolation. It's more difficult for them to do their work, to protect human rights, to help victims, and to get media attention during a lockdown. So any impact of the current situation on the freedom of expression, of association, freedom of assembly is going to impact human rights activists and the possibility to do their work. That is the basis for their work. And then activists need to move online. Then of course they would be subject to attacks online, just like any other organization could be. So this means then that they need more support than ever. And we shouldn't forget that defending human rights is a human right in itself. Well, I think it affects both human rights and the work of human rights defenders. Of course, you have the right to health. We also hear that there is a risk for increasing domestic violence, with victims of violence having more difficulties getting attention and reporting these crimes. For human rights defenders, well, I can't speak for all of them, but I can see dangers. I can see the crisis having an impact both on human rights and on the work of human rights defenders. In terms of rights, of course, you have the right to health, but there are also a lot of worry about increasing domestic violence with difficulties for victims of violence to report the crimes and to get help. As for the work of human rights defenders, I can see, because many of them are in any case threatened, that they would be even more vulnerable during these times. I can see the crisis have an impact both on human rights and on the work of human rights defenders. Of course, you have the right to health, which is an issue during these times. There are also a lot of worry about an increased domestic violence during the crisis, with victims of violence perhaps having more difficulties getting help and reporting crimes. For human rights defenders, I can't speak on their behalf, but I can see an increased risk for them. Many of them are in any case threatened, and of course you could be an easier target in isolation. During a lockdown it's more difficult for you to do your work, to get your word out, to support victims of human rights violations, to do advocacy work. Any impact on the freedom of assembly, for example, the freedom of expression, will of course have a huge impact on the work of human rights defenders. That is the basis for their work. And then if you have to move your activities online, you could be easier subject to digital attacks. That of course isn't only for human rights defenders, but for anyone, but it applies also to them. And I think the increased risk that they could be under during this kind of crisis just means that we need to support them even more. We mustn't relax. We need to keep attention up and support these defenders. And we shouldn't forget that defending human rights is a right in itself. And we shouldn't forget that the right to defend human rights is a human right. And we shouldn't forget that the right to defend human rights is a human right in itself.
What do you wish to accomplish with the exposition? What is the feeling you would like to bring people who see it?
Well, I want to shine the light on human rights activists and on the situation they're in. I want the exhibition to be a reminder that there are many out there having to fight for their lives for the rights which you and I take for granted. I want people to feel the need to continue, protect, defend and promote human rights. That it's urgent that we do this, that we mustn't relax, not even in this situation we're in now. I want to shine the light on human rights defenders and the situation they're in. I want the exposition to be a reminder that there are people out there fighting for their lives to protect human rights, rights that should be universal but aren't. I want people to feel the urgency and the need to continue, promote and protect human rights. And that goes for women's rights and emancipation, but all other human rights.
That's why we need to give these heroes a podium.
That's why we need to give these heroes a podium.
Thank you so much, Anette. No, that was my summing up of it, but it's okay.
Okay.
That was,
And that is why we need to give these defenders a podium. I want to shine the light on human rights defenders and the situation they're in. I want the exhibition to be a reminder that there are people out there risking their lives to defend human rights. I want people to feel the need also for them to continue, promote and protect human rights. And that goes for women's rights and emancipation, but all other human rights as well. I want to shine the light on human rights defenders and the situation they're in. I want this exhibition to be a reminder that there are people out there risking their lives to defend human rights. Human rights that should be universal, but aren't. I want people to feel the need to continue, protect and promote human rights. That goes for women's rights, but for all other human rights as well.
Why do we need to discuss democracy and human rights?
I think we need to discuss democracy in human rights and human rights to remain vigilant. Discussing it means we're keeping a finger on the pulse. that we are sharing information and discussing what's going on around us. I think we mustn't be in a situation where we and our governments can say, oh, we didn't know what happened in a particular region or place. I think we need to discuss it at home, at schools, at policy and legislative level, internationally and nationally. We need to discuss democracy and human rights in order to remain vigilant. Discussing it means we're keeping a finger on the pulse. By sharing and discussing information, we know what's going on around us. We mustn't be in a situation where we and our governments can say, oh, we didn't know, as an excuse to not intervene when abuses are taking place. So I think we need to keep the issues alive. I think we need to discuss it at home, at schools, at policy and decision-making level, nationally and internationally. Professor Kees Flinteman, one of those I portrayed for the series, also said to me, human rights begin at home.